The story that goes untold in the impeachment of Donald Trump. Yes, indeed, the narrative behind every top surface layer of narrative that is the impeachment discussion of Donald Trump lies multiple layers of untold stories. And the story in terms of real citizens that goes untold is another sacrificial, citizen sacrificial mini 9/11 murder event. And neither Democrats nor Republicans address this. What am I referring to? The events of Ukraine, Maidan, Russia, and their role in the impeachment trial. I'm Francis Hunt. This is the Reset Sniper. Welcome. Answers on a postcard if you think you know where I am, by the way. Bit of skyline for you. Okay, what are we talking about today? Well, you will have no doubt been drowned out with two major items, news-wise, that have been running the airways recently. One, the new bio threat of the season that has been chucked out, like H1N1 before it, bird flu, Ebola, Zika, and all those that went before it, which I'm largely staying above. And then the impeachment trial of Donald Trump and all the dramas pertaining around that. I'm going to talk about the latter, but it's the story under the story that never gets told. The real story, the real crisis, which makes both left and right complicit in planned, orchestrated dark state murder where neither are the king. That's right. Have a look at that eagle soaring. Oh, where is he? Let's see if I can get him in the shot. No, he's gone. He'll be back. He's doing loopy-de-loop around here. Anyway, so some of you will be here. Let's start with Eric Kiamela. The name has come out. Who is this guy? Well, this is a European crash course on some American characters. I'm sure many of you of my American watchers may know more about this story than me, but I'm going to pull together the bits that we've got. So essentially, Donald Trump, in a discussion with the current head of Ukraine, requested that some investigation be done into Biden and his son. That's right, Biden and his son. Now, Biden was to be, I think is no more, and is probably one of the biggest political losers in this narrative, Donald Trump's primary runner in threat for the 2020 elections at the end of this year. So therefore, it's deemed by the Democrats to have been, and this is part of the surface narrative, it's deemed by the Democrats to have been a politically motivated attempt of someone in office to undermine a political opponent, and therefore grounds for impeachment according to Nancy Pelosi and the rest of the Democratic Party. Basically, what this boils down to is a major defense closing up the lager around the crimes of the Democrats. By the way, I don't have a dog in this fight. I am neither left nor right in terms of favoring either party. There's plenty to be loathed in both camps. But in terms of the surface story, it's my opinion that the Democrats come out even more loathsome. But that just might be a bias I have for small governments, etc. I'm not a fan of the antagonist in chief, Mr. Trump, because none of them work for you. That's simple as that. But let's cover this. So Eric Kiamela, was of the Obama, and this is a name that should be mentioned way more and is getting away scot-free in this legacy, and there's a reason for it. They will be recycling the Obama legacy again. He's still young, there's legs, and of course there's the question about his wife and all of that. Gliding over this whole story scot-free when he shouldn't, and I'll close that loop later. But trust me, this isn't just a hating on Democrats as a Republican, because neither are dealing with the real underlying story, which I'll get to later. Anyway, so essentially someone using public office to undermine a political rival for an election is the accusation. Now, let's just take a little look at that. So during the Obama era, two-term Obama, who had a two-term vice president in the terms of Biden, who was patting Barry on the back and saying it's a big fucking deal when he pushed through Obamacare, which was meant to be the Democrats' version of Labor getting in the National Health and Service. You know, this was their, we made a social welfare contract, commitment to the people that's been made. You might remember all of that, him saying what a big deal it is. They were quite close. They're quite close. But Obama hasn't been dragged into this narrative yet, and probably is being kept clean for later use. I fear Biden was the runner boy and is going to carry the dirt for this whole story far worse than Hussein Obama. Anyway, so let's talk about what's happened. Essentially, Biden had his son suddenly become a major CEO in a corporation, earning substantial sums of money in a Ukrainian business, and it all was very politically expedient. And Eric Ciamella was very close with Biden, is a Russian-Ukrainian speaker, studied both those subjects, was a fan and part of the Democrat, and was held over. So he worked in the National Security Council, was pushed out, went to the CIA, back in the CIA, and essentially a hangover from the Obama legacy into Trump, and is deemed largely to be the whistleblower, for which the Democrats have been very upset that he's been exposed, while no one has officially denied that it was him. He was apparently leaking, and a large part behind the Russian collusion story. Large element of that was him. In fact, many in the Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, as soon as Trump got elected, set out to impeach him almost immediately, which has taken this long to get to this point, which probably is just going to make him more re-electable. As I've continued to assert, this whole story will backfire, and it's all to get Trump re-elected. And I don't think necessarily that's as good a thing as you think, because they're probably going to crash and do the reset on his watch to permanently taint the antagonistic, toxic white male conservative caricature that he's come to represent, which probably means people like me and many other people. So he's a straw man for throwing us all under the bus, while Obama is the eloquent, untouchable, clean man who will be recycled and is the current Martin Luther King / Kennedy president of the modern era. You know, he's so squeaky clean, along with his squeaky clean wife, if some are to believe, and etc., etc. Anyway, moving back into the narrative before I sidebar myself into I don't know how many different tangents. Ukraine suddenly became a European country. Now I have a history here. I traveled to both Odessa many times prior to Ukraine suddenly discovering its European heritage instead of its Russian heritage, even though every Ukrainian speaks Russian and Ukrainian, which is very similar, but not identical. I went to Kiev prior to the Maidan Square shootings, and we'll come far more into that in a bit. In fact, when I was traveling, I used to be able to get Grivna in UK before going. So I made 7, 8, 9 trips prior to all these events, during these events, and after. I've stood in Maidan Square a number of times. I've looked how the narrative has been framed. The story that goes untold by all of this, if we cut to the chase, the story that goes untold by all of this is that Open Society funding, George Soros, Newland, remember that name, she was, and I have to sidebar here, she was caught and recorded by the FSB, that's the Russian Secret Service, bragging to the Polish minister how people should fuck Europe in terms of all of this to do with Ukraine and everything. We are calling the shots. We flipped this country for under 5 billion, and if we need to do it again, we can and will. That was Newland's brag. Russia released the tapes to Europe's disdain, to hear the contempt that the American office held for Europe as the key driver in the regime change of the then head of Ukraine, who suddenly found himself at the midst of a riot, a conjured up rent-a-crowd riot that was paid and funded by the Open Society, for which Newland oversaw, for which Eric Kiermela is part of and has been a funded agent of on the ground for George Soros. So what you actually have was the whole axis to flip Ukraine against Russia. Remember, I had a girlfriend who was Ukrainian. I remember asking her, do you feel more Russian or European? This is long before all of these things happened. He said, we speak Russian. We were part of the USSR. It's our culture. These are our people. Only to watch her, once they flipped the country, become very anti-Russian, and she was facing all this propaganda about evil Russia is, and suddenly become very Eurocentric. I saw this whole metamorphosis with the TV flow, certain stars declaring their allegiance to one and their mockery for the other, and we saw the divide and conquer principle and the propaganda principle come into sway, where Russia became the big evil for taking back its Crimea, which it had given anyway to Ukraine while Ukraine was a friendly state, and represents its primary port into the Black Sea as a strategic element, and was always part of the USSR right from, and fought and rescued, by the way, in the Crimean War history long ago. So Crimea has always been a Russia/USSR stronghold, and as long as Ukraine was a friendly province, was happy to be holding it. Instead, we were told that Russia was the aggressor and was stealing land, when there was a regime change flip in Ukraine, which involved the airline stories and too many other things to unpack in a single YouTube. Anyway, Kiermela was a Soros, and still is a Soros agent, has been a whistleblower against Trump since being carried all over. He's a state employee. People saying how terrible that a whistleblower state employee has been exposed. Well, he's an active manipulator and dark state operative, and he is funded and doesn't work for the American people, but works for the people who pay him, such as Soros. He's also worked in the World Bank, as well as the National Security Council, NSC, and the CIA. So he's been involved in all sorts of dark states, which is actually pretty much the swamp that Trump was supposed to be draining and only isn't, and is a very dark operative. So where are we going with all of this? The key story, and I watched again and again and many times, and I participated in, is prior to all the things going down in Ukraine. I couldn't get Grivna a year before, 6 months before anymore, when I was trying to exchange currency. It became clear that the banks already knew that something was going to be going down. Later, the Grivna currency lost an abnormal amount. It had a Zimbabwe type event, and of course there were bank freezings. They couldn't take more than $100 out in America. All sorts of runs. People were selling their cars for a third of what they were worth, Porsche Cayennes, etc. When all of this went down, there was a rush for cash. All the debt was exposed. Russia stopped doing subsidized gas, etc., etc. They became bankrupt, and they became ward of state financially to America, who is paying it, more than broken Europe, who didn't want to pay it. Hence the fuck Europe comments of Newland. We're running the show, to the Polish minister, which was exposed. So essentially, the overthrow of Ukraine from being a Russia-friendly state, speaking Russian and Ukrainian, with some of its history, let's not, there has been difficult history in terms of Lviv, World War II, people left to starve, some of it dating back to the Zionists, the white versus the red Russians, and Bolshevism via Lenin and Trotsky, that saw immense amounts of Ukrainians die, left to starve, etc., which has been falsely directed against Russia. Remember, Stalin was a Georgian, Trotsky and Lenin were Zionists, and actual everyday Russians do not deserve the ire of these parasitic, inserted and infiltrators into Russia that then led and flipped communism in the 1917s, just post the Great First World War. So much to cover. so easy to go on tangents. Let's rein it back in, but let's stick with how the impeachment. So the whole story of the impeachment is about a man in office who requested an inquiry on another political leader in Ukraine surrounding a political rival. Well, actually, that's the crime. That's what the Democrats are wanting the impeachment for. This is where the focus and all the eyes are being turned to. When in actual fact, there's quite clear, huge corruption from the Democratic Party. Biden is the runner boy for collecting the gifts for the dirty Democrat politicians. And who's remained perfectly clean through all of this? Hands off so that he can be recycled and used again, or family members can. Good old Barry Hussein Obama. Now let's be clear. Biden went to Ukraine and said, remove that attorney general that is investigating my son, otherwise your foreign aid gets pulled. How's that for political interference? Preventing investigation into his own corrupt dealing, theft, money laundering, and profiteering as a man of political office, a vice president, with a son, family member, out of America, working in Ukraine and filching the global marketplace through this corporation, leveraging corruption, and then killing investigation. That is not the story. That an acting vice president who is actually running the money, and now you have to ask yourself, does Barry Hussein Obama know that Biden said, fire this guy or I withhold your aid? Who was president of the flipping country? Do you think he had no idea? Do you think he's just floating above this like Ronald Reagan on Iran-Contra? Me, I know nothing. He has been receiving proceeds from that corruption just like everybody else, only his hands free from it. He's one step removed. The dirty gun runner and money collector, the bag runner for all the Democrat political elite, filching out the money, was Biden. And he's the one that's caught. He's the guy running the drugs. He's the guy collecting the cash brown envelopes. Who else do you think was receiving? Did Obama know nothing? Did Obama know nothing that someone representing his office, the guy in the office next door to him, blocked foreign aid unless somebody conducting an investigation against family members in their country, guilty of corruption in the most likely instance? Did Obama know nothing of all of this? Apparently you're led to believe so. These are the questions that don't go asked. Who was on the receiving end? How deep is the iceberg below the waterline? Do you think the only person benefiting from this little family corruption fraud is Biden? Do you think everybody else is going to sit quietly and let it happen if they're not getting their little greasy palmed oil? Remember, when someone's stealing, everybody's honest if they ain't in on it. The minute someone wants to steal and do corruption, you've got to cut everybody in, otherwise everybody is so honest and goody two-shoes. So Obama would have been receiving almost certainly substantial flows from that which Biden and his family members had orchestrated. However, he's been kept out of all these discussions because the Kissinger doctrine requires the utilization of our black American Henry Kissinger, JFK, Martin Luther King, statesmen of great currency. They need that currency again in the future, in the family or either he himself. Biden is expendable. He's an old man, he's at the end of his tether. He deserves to be retired and fired as a rich man and corrupted with a tainted name, and he's already there. But the real story was Maidan Square and the shootings at Maidan Square. No one asks and no one wants revisit. American operatives, I saw them, I heard them speaking in American accents. Special Forces Americans were in Ukraine at that time. They were in the Ukraine National Hotel. They fired and shot. And this is where Kiamela, Newland, Biden all come in. Required was a martyrdom event, much like 9/11, a mini a mini version of 9/11, a martyrdom event to despise Russia for the future onwards as the cause of the death of the 99 great martyrs of Maidan Square. I've been there. I saw the chip stones. I saw the pictures. I saw the guards protecting the narrative so that you couldn't tear the posters down. Many know that shots were fired. Third-party shots were fired by American accent special forces that were shooting on both the renter crowd, George Soros stooges that were sacrificed in a bucket, shot at like rabbits in a bucket by special force agents, plus the police, plus the riot police that were there and told not to shoot on their citizens and were fired upon, giving the impression that there were citizens that had weapons and were shooting at the police to attempt to cause a massacre. Neither the chief of police in Ukraine and Kiev nor the prime minister gave anybody permission to fire. A third force existed. The third force was America, funded with the $5 billion that Newland bragged about. A 9/11 for Ukraine. Victims and evildoers to be framed. The scourge that is Russia. The operatives. The Russian neo-Nazis that wanted to kill. Meanwhile, most of the neo-Nazi groups were in Ukraine. I was in Odessa. I walked past a building that I later saw on video burnt to the ground, where Russian sympathetic Ukrainians were hunted down and shot by absolute banditos, Nazi banditos. They were shot and killed in the building, one of which included a pregnant woman. I saw it like a snuff movie. I saw the pictures. It was vile, disgusting, and it torments you by mind. They had petrol poured on them and burnt on them to hide the evidence that they were shot and to turn the corpses as much into a minefield of impossibility for any real forensic examination. Plus, access to them were restricted. This was part of the Kara, both Odessa, which is on the Black Sea, which I know well and visited many times, Kiev. As I say, I'm the Forrest Gump of the Great Reset and the Dark States operatives. It seems everywhere I've gone, there's a story to be told, and I've seen both befores and afters. And let me tell you, the great story that goes untold is the Dark State murder. They sacrificed 99 people that they've created as martyrs, that were patsies, that were fired on by special forces from America. This is the great murder and this is the great question that Trump, if he truly was a swamp drainer, if he truly wasn't a Zionist, these are different Zionist factions fighting it out. If he truly wasn't a Zionist, he would be asking, why was George Soros writing emails to the later president that was European friendly? I stood in Kiev Square and listened to his New Year speech, and it was about 3 degrees in the snow, and listened to him, we are all Europeans now. It was New Year, I'm trying to remember what year it was. Could have been 2014 becoming 15, I can't recall, or whether it was 13. My mind is a blur of travel. And I listened to him celebrating how, and telling the Ukrainian masses how they're all European now, with the flags of Europe flying over, even though they do not get the full support of the EU, they do not have full visa rights of movement yet, and they're on a bankrupt state with very little funds and money, relying directly on America to fund them, for which Trump was threatening, apparently, withholding military equipment. Remember, they're in this slow tempo war against Russian sympathizers in the other half of their country, Donetsk and everything else, only doing what Biden had done before him. So while I don't condone Trump's behavior, he is only showing how America does business. The economic hitman of the world, the bully of the world, you will be removed from the dollar payment system of the world. Europe just got threatened with 25% tariffs on autos if they don't come to the party on what America needs. No one is above being bullied and having the threat of removal by the dark American political state, and every actor involved utilizes that to be a bully. By being America, you carry a big stick and you get a whole bunch of easier ride if you're prepared to wave it in a lot of smaller people's faces. And boy, do they wave it. And this is why crypto, this is why the end of the dollar hegemony will be good, because it'll bring a much tougher political, economic, and negotiation environment for the dark state and American politics as a whole. Because the day of bullying, the day of financial leverage will eventually end. Others like Max Kaiser are covering this. Anyway, the great story untold is the murder of 100 people in Maidan Square, not to mention all the other deaths in Odessa and also the deaths in the east of Ukraine, in the Russian sympathetic Luhansk, Donetsk, and all the other areas where citizens are being fired on and war has been fought, not to mention the airline, how it was shot down, the nature under which it was shot down, 20mm rounds from Ukrainian fighter plane, not from a Russian SAM, not to mention all the other narratives with fakery and fuckery that have been poured down upon you. This impeachment story is not about a president and impeachment. This is about one faction, one control structure faction fighting another control structure faction stylistically, story overlaying story, where the real moral mega story is both are implicit in the death of those people, both Republicans and Democrats. The real questions the Republicans should be asking is why did we murder and see as expendable substantial number of Ukrainian citizens to achieve a political objective, which flipped Ukraine to Europe and introduced all the energy benefits of pipelines via Turkey and all the other geopolitical, because people are expendable by dark state, and the sooner you realize that your intelligence services will sacrifice you like sheep in a flipping abattoir, the sooner you realize that the decisions made by your politicians are life and death about you, and what they choose to fight about are details of style where both are corruptible to the core and you are an utterly expendable animal, lower than shark shit animal that can be sacrificed and should be sacrificed to create leverage, emotional leverage, to create new division, new hate, new resentment, and new political lines like chess pieces on a board. And the sooner you realize that that's their game, the sooner you realize the story is not about whether Trump should be punished for asking investigation on a political rival. That is just level one story. That the real story is there's utter corruption by the Democratic Party. They are stealing for everyone in that top level of the upper echelon. Biden would not be the sole beneficiary. No one's going to let one guy getting away for funneling huge amounts of money, with some of it probably American provided foreign aid, to corporations that are earning it back as earnings, and the sole beneficiary is the Biden family. If you think that, you are fucking stupid. Let me say that again. If you think the sole beneficiary for all this corruptibility, this handing over of taxpayers-based funds from America to Ukraine being siphoned back through the Biden family-controlled corruptible corporation, and the sole beneficiary is Biden and his family member, then you are stupid. He's just the runner boy for the whole scam. Your American tax dollars are being stolen by your own politicians as they move pieces around on a chessboard and shoot citizens up of other countries for their political strategic game, much of it mastered by George Soros, the Open Society, who writes emails, which the Russians also released, proving that he was managing the sweet billionaire from Ukraine, who was then the president at the time, who I saw describe his European status on a New Year message to his citizens in that same square where 2 years before they had opened the doors for foreign national secret services to shoot the shit out of their own citizens and riot police, to create an environment to overthrow a government. That is your story. Everything else is fucking he said, she said. Excuse all the F-bombs, but I get totally pissed when murder is brushed under the carpet for a minor detail of political expediency between two crooked, bent, sociopathic, both Zionistic, just in different stylistic ways, political parties. I'm Francis. Click on the link below if you want to become part of a trading group that is playing the Great Reset, understands that these guys don't work for you, and takes control and takes direction on managing your own wealth to come out of this reset as strongly as possible. That is my take on the scandal of the impeachment trial and the murder that went well before it, upon which all the Ukraine and Russian narrative is built. Bye for now, guys. Cheers.